Dad, there's a Dr. Goodrich here to see you. I think he's a minister.
Oh? This plant's not as green as it ought to be.
Dad, Dr. Goodrich said he'd called you for an appointment.
Yes, I'm expecting him. He's a preacher, all right. I guess you know what he wants to talk to me about.
I think I do, Dad. But whatever it is, you watch your temper and your language. Really, Dad, you embarrassed me yesterday when Dr. Swanson was here.
Well, if they tend to their business, I tend to mine. But let's not keep a Methodist minister waiting. Bring him in here.
Dad, this is Dr. Goodrich, my father, Doctor.
How do you do, Mr. Wortham?
Unusually well, if I do say so. As I said to both the other two preachers who've been to see me in the past week, it's always a pleasure for a Wortham to welcome a Methodist minister into his home. Won't you sit down, Doctor?
Well, thank you, sir. I understand that both you and your daughter are Methodists.
We have quite a background in the church. Been Methodists for generations. When we first moved to this city, people from your local churches used to drop by from time to time about my moving my membership here. But I told them I'd join the church in Pinestone and I'd stay with the church in Pinestone. My daughter saw fit to join the local congregation after leaving our family church. That was her own choice, and I hope she's happy with it.
I'm quite happy with my choice, Dad. You know that. I just recently joined the new Grandview congregation.
Which I suppose brings us to the subject of the moment. You know, from my own choice, I haven't seen too much of the Methodists in this city until lately. But in the past few weeks, I have seen, quite frankly, much too much. It seemed like you were holding annual conference right here in my home. And that so-called Grandview congregation is always the topic of interest. Sooner or later, the talking always gets around to a certain lot at the corner of Grandview and Highway 273, on which some people would like to build a church. And all they want me to do is to agree to a minor zoning change.
Dad.
Couldn't be you also were interested in rezoning that lot?
Our church is sponsoring that new Grandview congregation. We bought this corner lot here because this is the best location in this whole area for a church building. But you own all the land adjoining us and are blocking any zoning change, and therefore you're keeping us from getting a building permit. Now, Mr. Wortham, if you would...
Yes, I know. I've certainly heard it enough times. The fact remains, Dr. Goodrich, that if a church is built next to me, it would reduce the commercial value of my land as a shopping center. The zoning laws are my only protection. Naturally, I won't agree to any change.
But this need is beyond any dollar consideration, Mr. Wortham. There's not a single church in this whole area that's been built up in the last 10 years. Thousands of new families and no place to worship. There's a tremendous need.
Dr. Goodrich, my feeling about the matter is the same today as it was yesterday and will be tomorrow. I will not permit the building of any church, Methodist or otherwise, on that corner. That's all there is to it.
Oh, would you excuse me for a moment? I left something on the stove. Oh, please don't get up, Dr. Goodrich. And don't go until I come back.
Oh, he's not about to leave, daughter. Persistence comes easy for these Methodist ministers.
Thank you, Miss Wortham. I'll stay. You have a fine young girl there, Mr. Wortham. You ought to be very proud of her.
I don't know that I should. If she'd been a boy, the name of Wortham would have gone on. As it is, I'm the last of a long, distinguished line.
My father knew a Cedric M. Wortham in Pinestone.
My brother, he died last April. Splendid banker.
I understood that he was quite active in the church there at Pinestone.
The Wortham family and the Methodist Church at Pinestone have had the closest kind of relationship for almost a century now. Pinestone Methodist is my church. It's been 20 years since I moved here, but I've always kept my membership up to date there in Pinestone.
Why didn't you join one of the churches here in town during all that time?
Pinestone Methodist is our family church. My ancestors have stood by that church ever since it was built. Do you know who laid the bricks? My great-grandfather. He and his slaves put up the walls of that church.
Why, that's a wonderful heritage.
I remember one of the bishops said, and this was many years ago when I was just a boy, it's hard to imagine Pinestone Methodist without a Wortham. And I am the last Wortham left in Pinestone.
But you're not in Pinestone. You've been here 20 years now.
I do live here, but Pinestone Methodist is still my church. The strength of a church is the permanence of its members. I've always maintained that. Don't you agree?
Why, no, I don't.
Well, don't you want the members of your church to be permanent in their relationship with you?
Only so long as they're not more useful in some other church. Why did your ancestors join the church in Pinestone originally?
Why, they didn't just join it. They organized it. They saw that Pinestone needed a church. It was a rough town in those days. Gambling, shooting, drunkenness, fighting in the streets. It wasn't the kind of town you'd want to bring a family to.
Your great-grandfather saw the need for a church to try to change all this.
That's right. He knew a town with a strong church didn't have that sort of thing. And then, too, he wanted a place where he could worship God like he'd been taught to do.
I guess that your ancestors built the church in Pinestone for the same reason that most people join churches that are already built. They want to worship God and learn more about him. They want to be able to have the companionship of persons who feel as they do. And they want to be a part of a group that's setting out to do some things that need doing, but could never be done by individuals working alone.
I'm sure my great-grandfather had all those reasons.
How'd you happen not to follow his fine example?
Me? Not follow him? Why, sir, I patterned my life after him. I went to the same college he went to. I entered the lumber business because yes, my grandfather and father were in the lumber business. Incidentally, I did better, made more money than all of them. But like they belonged to Pinestone Methodist, today I belong to Pinestone Methodist. All along, I followed my great-grandfather's footsteps.
You've merely gone through the form of following them. You haven't been the kind of a Christian or even the kind of a citizen here in this town that they were in Pinestone.
But the situation is different.
How is it different? Can you say there's no vice in our city? Can you say that there are no gambling on the sidewalks, no drunken drivers on the highway, no rackets, no bribery or graft, no stealing or bombing or murdering? If you can say that all these evils don't exist in our city, and on a far greater scale than Pinestone ever knew, then I'll agree with you that the situation is different.
All right, there is vice here, but I can't stop it.
Have you tried?
Well, of course No, I guess I haven't tried.
Well, maybe it doesn't matter how you leave the Wortham name. As you say, you're the last of the line.
How I leave the family name? But I've certainly tried to live my life as a Wortham should.
I'm sure you have. I think the whole trouble is that you followed the pattern of your ancestors without understanding the spirit which caused them to lead the fine lives that they led. You remembered what they did, but you didn't know why they did it.
You mean my grandfather wouldn't have lived as I have?
From what I've learned of your grandfather, if he had moved here to this city, he would have joined some local church the first month that he was here. Wherever he went, he would have taken his place in the struggle against vice and evil, because that struggle is fundamentally the same wherever you go, Pinestone or Little Rock, Philadelphia or San Diego. Wherever you go in all the world, there's greed and corruption, there's vice and evil, but there's always also something else. There's a church or a group opposing that evil. Your grandfather would have taken his place in the church and joined the battle. He most surely would not have stood by and watched as you have all these years.
I guess I have been watching from the sidelines. I haven't given any really constructive help to the churches since I've been here. You know, 20 years is a long time to sit on the sidelines. You hardly know how to get started again.
You can start right now. We could sure use a Wortham in our church. That is, if you have half the energy your ancestors had.
I've got as much as any of them, probably more. And I've had a good long rest, too. All right, you can count me in. I'll join your church next Sunday.
Are you feeling well, Dad?
Never better, daughter. You've been talking about all the work you've done for your little Grandview congregation. Now, I'm going to show you how a Wortham really works.
Dad, I just can't believe it.
And work Mr. Wortham did. We were in the midst of an evangelism campaign at the church at that time, striving to get new members. Mr. Wortham entered that campaign like a dynamo, talked to no telling how many people. And whereas I don't know exactly what he said, it was probably something like this.
Now, that's what I thought, Bill. For 20 years, I said it didn't matter whether I joined a local church. But believe me, Bill, I was wrong. We need all the churches and all the members we can get. We need them right here in this city, and we need them today. That's why I agreed to a rezoning of my Grandview property. We need a church there worse than I need a shopping center.
Mr. Wortham's making a good church member, but it's too bad he didn't move his membership here sooner. He's missed a great deal, and the church has suffered from his absence, just as it suffers from the absence of any one of you. That's why it's so important to be a member of the church in the community or the city where you live. Your need of the church and the church's need for you are the same today as they were yesterday. There's not a one of us that is not desperately needed in this worldwide fight for honor and nobility and truth in life. The Christian church is freedom's first line of defense against communism and all that it means. And you're needed now, not next month or next year, in the Christian cause. There are no timeouts in life. You are needed every moment. There's a part of a verse in Ephesians which speaks of the supreme importance of the church. Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it.